Welcome to the Left of Str8 Show, your one-stop destination for intriguing conversations with extraordinary individuals who are boldly navigating life outside the conventional norms. Our host, Scott Fullerton, is thrilled to embark on this journey of discovery with all of you. The Left of Str8 Show, we believe that every person's story is unique, and it's our mission to showcase the diversity of human experiences. We bring you the untold stories of fascinating people who identify as LGBT+ and allies, pushing boundaries, breaking stereotypes, and making a positive impact in our communities. On this show, we bring you a diverse lineup of inspiring guests, from activists to artists, and entrepreneurs to entertainers, and everything in between. We dive deep into their personal journeys, discovering the pivotal moment that has shaped their lives and careers. You can expect thought-provoking discussions on a wide range of topics, from LGBTQ rights, social justice to arts, culture, mental health, and more. Our guests are change makers who share their insights, challenges, and triumphs, igniting conversation that promotes empathy, understanding, and love. So whether you're part of the LGBTQ community or an ally looking to expand your knowledge and show your support, the Left of Str8 Show is for you. Together, we can build bridges of understanding and acceptance, celebrating the beauty of what makes us all unique. So sit back, grab a drink, and get ready for the show.
Well, hello there, listeners. It's October here at Left of Str8 Radio, and I'm your host, as always, Scott Fullerton. When I interview great celebrities and personalities from entertainment, foodies, books, music, and advocacy for our LGBTQ community and straight allies. I am so excited that we are bookending spooky season. Of course, we had the fantastic Sam Irvin to start us off back in the first week, and we are finishing up with a true master of horror. Michael Varrati is in studio today. It's going to be a fantastic time. Honored as heck to bring him back on the show. He's a producer, writer, filmmaker, podcaster. He does it all. He haunts the silver screen, television, and the podcast realm. He's a visionary along with his partner, Brandon Kirby of June Gloom Productions. He's also known for his writing, queer horror short films, My Fave Christmas Movies, and that sinister podcast. He's the kind that turns nightmares into art. And I'm so excited we bonded back in the day over as many places he grew up right here in Western PA, across the border from where I'm at in Northeast Ohio. He was recently invited back to his alma mater, Kent State. And we have so much other things to catch on because he's been just busy as heck this spooky season. So please welcome back to the show the very handsome, the very talented Mr. Michael Varrati's here. How you doing, Michael?
Well, I'm doing well, and I'm especially doing well after that really kind intro. Thank you so much, and happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween to you. Just a couple more short days.
Yeah.
Now, do you have trick-or-treaters go by your place? Are you a house or apartment or?
I live in an apartment complex here in Los Angeles. We don't get a lot of trick-or-treaters, but I always get at least 1 or 2 bags of candy just in case, because I do not want to be caught unaware. And then, of course, I benefit if no one comes. So either way.
Exactly. Yeah, we're in Northeast Ohio here, but our neighborhood's kind of gotten older lately, so we don't have that many kids around. So I go to my little handy-dandy Wendy's and get the little free Frosty coupons and a bag of candy for just a backup, just like you. Well, welcome back to the show. I mean, it's been a hot minute or two, but this is always your busy season, so thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. And yeah, it's been busy so far, but it's been a good month. I've been running around doing various spooky activities. I just am coming off the heels of hosting a Q&A at Screamfest here in LA for my friend and colleague Erlinger Torridson. He just premiered his new movie, The Piper, and I was lucky enough to conduct the Q&A of that. It's a beautiful movie. I encourage people to check it out when it comes out. And then just all sorts of other haunted hijinks.
Exactly. I think you were in San Francisco earlier this month, and you were just all over the place.
Yeah, I was in San Francisco earlier this month to co-host an event screening of Dario Argento's Phenomena with a group up there called Media Meltdown. We did a sort of drag pre-show with the movie as well as a contest. It was very punk rock. And then while I was there, I also visited my friend Peaches Christ's haunted attraction, Terror Vault, which is amazing. And I don't know if there is enough time for people people listening to this to still go before it closes. I think it's open one more weekend after Halloween. But if you can, you should check it out. It's truly like a great combination of immersive theater and scary haunted attraction. And she always really does it up right.
I bet. Fantastic. That is so awesome. Well, let's get into a little bit of your Ohio background here. Like I said, you grew up kind of all over the place a bit. You moved around a lot, but not too far from me in Western PA. You went to school at Kent State. They invited you back. What an honor is that? You got to give out do a little commencement speech.
Yeah, it was really great. I was originally approached by Kent before the pandemic. I think in 2019, they had asked me to do a graduation speech. They do a special event there called the Lavender Graduation, which is centered all around LGBTQIA students, and it's put on by their LGBT center. And we didn't have anything like that when I went to Kent. So to not only see this university's evolution in queer matters, as well as having a commencement ceremony specifically for queer students, I was bowled over to learn about, let alone be invited to do a commencement speech. And when they first reached out, we had some scheduling conflicts, and I was in the midst of shooting a season of Dragula, and I couldn't go. And so I just thought I missed my boat, but I was just happy to know that my university was doing right by queer folks. And then they cycled back this year, and they asked me to come and give the commencement speech for this year's ceremony at the Lavender graduation. It was the alumni speech. And I was really honored. And it was great because it was the first time I've been back to Kent in close to 20 years. And it was surreal, to say the least. You know, you remember things the way they used to be, but things change. Right. So anybody who has lived in a small town knows that, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. But there are updates. So while I was wandering around Kent, kind of catching up after 2 decades away, there were things I recognized, but it also felt like a whole new place. And I think that makes sense, you know, because college towns, I'm sure every 5 to 10 years switch for the new generation. But it was really wonderful. It was great to be back in that town, to be back at the university, which meant so much to me. I really even, you know, began a lot of the work in the world of indie horror at Kent that I do today. So it was sort of a nice homecoming. And then to get to speak at the university, because when I think about my career, I'm proud of the work I've done. And I feel like that some of it, I guess some people could argue is important, but I'm just happy that I get to do it. So for someone to think that it's significant enough to impart some knowledge to the next generation, hopefully I just did right by them.
Definitely a well-deserved honor, my friend. And you're right. I mean, like I said, I live here now, so it's like the area's grown. I mean, all those little exits off of 76 used to be nothing but farmland, and now there's major hospitals and all sorts of hotels and everything right along that area. So yeah, it had to be a little bit different to come back, but how nice for them to give you that honor to speak, and you are the person to do it, my friend. I remember us talking back in the day. You were going to hopefully one of these days come back with Chelsea Stardust and do a movie back here in Ohio. We got to get you to find some setting back here. That would be amazing. Still kind of very rustic back here.
It's true. I actually saw Chelsea Stardust yesterday. She is the curator and hostess of an annual pumpkin carving party here in Los Angeles that is usually populated by many horror filmmakers and writers and performers. And she had quite the turnout. I think there were 19 of us there sitting around carving pumpkins. And she and I are often looking for something to do together film-wise, and I have no doubt that we'll both get back to the Buckeye State at some point. It's too beautiful to not try and shoot something there.
There you go. Well, I have an extra bedroom. You and that handsome boyfriend of yours, come on by and we'll treat you right. See all the
Thank
sights.
you.
And talk about, I mean, I remember that we talked in your first interview that you really weren't into horror in the beginning. I mean, I kind of saw a couple movies with your parents that kind of changed it all around. What do you tell people that really don't think they're into horror? What's some of the training wheels movies that you like to see them, and how do you kind of get them onto the dark side?
Well, it's interesting. I think when we first spoke back in 2020, right? It was 2020. I
Yeah.
told the story about how when I was a little kid, I was afraid of everything. I was a scaredy cat. I would turn the television off if even the music got a little intense. I just didn't want to deal with it. But I found my entry point watching late night cable and things that were screened on USA Up All Night, having horror hosts like Rhonda Shear or Elvira being sort of like a fun friend that allowed this entry point into the world. Uh, but as I grew into the genre and sort of had my baptism into the world of horror that changed my life, I kind of realized that the idea that horror movies aren't for everybody is not really true. I see this from time to time where someone will say, well, I don't really like horror movies. And I think what happened is in the 80s, when we sort of had the pinnacle of slasher movies, it defined kind of what the public consciousness thought of as a horror film. And they associated it with excess and gore. And that's not for everybody. And I think that's totally
Right.
valid. But that's just one kind of horror movie. Horror movies exist in a many subgenre universe. And so when people tell me they don't like scary movies or they don't like horror movies, I always know that that's fundamentally not true, because what happens then is when they start listing their favorite movies, they'll say something that I'm like, oh no, but that's a horror movie. I had someone, for example, once say, well, I don't really like horror movies. And I was like, well, what movies do you like? And they were going through the list and they were saying, this, Silence of the Lambs. And I was like, well, that's a horror movie. And the person was like, well, not really. It's a thriller. It was what thrillers are horror movies of a different name. I don't know how
Right.
you can think of Silence of the Lambs as anything other than horror, because, in Nancy Meyers movies, they're not eating people. So it's just more psychological, or maybe it's more, I don't want to say artfully done, because I think there's an art to every style of film. It's just how you approach it. But it is maybe more prestige because it came from a named director like Jonathan Demme. It got the attention of the Academy. So people kind of recontextualize what they think of as genre, because we have been conditioned in a societal way to think of horror as sort of the black sheep, or this scrappy thing, or this messy thing. But we see it all over the place, and we see it in so many different arenas, and movies with intrigue or atmosphere or style. Crimson Peak, The Others, all of Hitchcock's work has elements of horror, and they're not necessarily bloody. They're not Saw or Hostel, but they're horror nonetheless. So when people unpack these things, even if every Halloween you don't watch something scary, but you have to watch Hocus Pocus, that's a horror movie for the family. It's about witches who want to eat children. That's scary.
Exactly. No, I agree 100%. I used to always say that I was not a fan of horror, but exactly as you say, I've kind of upped my palate a bit because I don't like the slasher and I don't like the blood movies, but I do love a psychological thriller. I mean, even on your podcast, I mean, you had Dead for Filth Forever. Now you're at Midnight Mass. You go into the supernatural range, and I love the kind of the supernatural and the woo woo kind of stuff. So you cover it all, really, right?
Yeah, well, with Midnight Mass specifically, Dead for Filth was always a conversation series where I sat with horror creators, queer horror creators, or queer allied horror creators, and talked about their journey into the genre. And it was sort of my answer, I guess, to Mark Maron in the horror space, although he would probably loathe to hear that comparison. But I just wanted to sit and talk to other creators, uh, because the journeys were always unique, but there was a lot of commonality, especially for queer folks. Dead for Filth was really special to me because I got to discover how important the genre was in people's finding themselves. Midnight Mass, in a different way, is more centered on films, whereas Dead for Filth was centered on people. Midnight Mass is centered on films, and it's a cult film podcast, so it's not relegated specifically to horror. We're interested in the communities that rise up around certain films and how people celebrate them. Obviously, Rocky Horror is one of the best cultural examples, but we can look at movies outside of the horror genre, like Anti-Mame, which we did as one of our Christmas episodes, and people are rabid fans of that, to the fact that it still gets theatrical screenings every holiday season, because there's something about Rosalind Russell's fabulousness that people want to embody in their daily lives. And that's what we like to celebrate at Midnight Mass, are the movies that we see and hold on to and carry with us throughout our lives. And sometimes they're horror. Often they're horror because cult film audiences tend to feel othered in some way, but they're not always horror. There's something like Anti-Mame or Sunset Boulevard, which I argue is a little horror anyway. But we celebrate a little bit of a wider swath, but they're all part of a certain kind of fabric, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. And I got a couple questions from my regular listeners that I wanted to bring to you. One of them kind of talks about that otherness you just talked about. This was from Mark Litz in New York City. How do you infuse LGBTQ narratives into your horror creation? Is it a conscious choice or something that naturally manifests? I mean, you're very much into combining that LGBTQ culture and your horror, right?
I am. A lot of my personal works directly intertwine queer identity and horror, but I would argue, as a whole, horror is queer already. The reality is that horror, by its definition, is a genre of otherness, and queer people are othered by society. It's something that we understand. It's also a genre of subversion, and we are used to being treated as the subversive element of society. So things that are subtextually present in horror movies are relatable to queer people or marginalized people. And from horror's very beginnings, even before the screen, if you look at something like Dracula, I always use this example because it's a quick and easy way to point out how queerness has already and always been part of this genre that we love. Dracula was born out of Bram Stoker's fandom for a book called Carmilla, which is about a lesbian vampire that predates Dracula by about 35 years. He loved that book. He borrowed elements of it to create Dracula. And so we don't get the world's most famous identifiable vampire without a lesbian vampire first. It's been in the foundations, it's baked in. Horror's already queer. It's just whether the text is overt or subtext. So I think that there's always a little something to be found there. It's just more whether you choose to bring it to the surface or not. But there's always something there.
Right. I was so lucky to interview a couple of weeks back Charles Busch, who did Vampire Lesbians of Sodom, the play.
Yes.
And so, yeah, exactly. There's such kind of fun stories weaved into all of it that I absolutely love that.
Yeah, actually, Charles Busch was our guest on our Anti-Mame episode of Midnight Mass. Speaking of, there's your full circle moment.
That's nice. I didn't know that. That's awesome. In question 2 I have, this is from Jason Levy in LA. Michael, what's your favorite horror filmmaking technique or trope that kind of never fails to send chills to your viewers?
It's interesting. My favorite technique actually has to do with sound. I think that we are used to, in the modern landscape, jump scares, which are always effective, if not to some folks a cheap technique, but they do work. But I think what's interesting is that we tend to think of film so much as a visual medium, and it is. But sound design in a movie can really, really create a sense of tension. Think of a scene where someone's creeping through an empty building, and if there's a particular score that can affect your mood, or sometimes no sound can make you even more tense, like just absolute quiet, or the things that you hear, or the things that you don't, or the subtle like manipulation of noise. And I really, really love in horror movies when people pay attention to how they design the sound, because fear is a full-bodied experience. It's not just something you see, it's something you feel. So if you hear something that can affect you or creep up the back of your neck, that can be just as powerful as putting a monster on screen to me. And so I love when movies play with sound design, and it's something that I am trying to be even more conscious of in my work. I've done it a little bit, especially with some of the shorts that we did during COVID, where we were only able to really have 1 or 2 actors on screen. We had to create kind of different ways to establish atmosphere. But from learning that and imparting that in those pieces, I think about it more in a larger way now. Like, how can we do that? And you see movies like The Quiet Place, for example, which clearly benefits from sound design because the creatures respond to sound. So I really love horror that plays with all of our senses. And I think that when you key into the idea that the audio can be just as terrifying as the visual, you'll start noticing it more in horror movies that you watch, even ones that you've been watching for years. You'll be like, oh, they did a thing here that maybe I wasn't tuned into before.
No, it's such a good point. I like listening, like even 911 calls. I have a friend that does a podcast on the night, and just hearing the kind of cadence and everything, how those things happen, really affects the entire mood, right? So you can
Yeah.
really kind of play with those quite a bit. And horror, I mean, you're just so many great events. It seems like there's a really close knit community among, especially LGBTQ horror movies. But talk about the community in general. What do you guys learn from each other? How is it kind of really help each other in those kind of forums like that to get your work out there and to just learn the craft?
I think that horror is one of those genres that, because the mainstream, but also the establishment for a long time sort of treated it as a black sheep genre. It was one of the few artistic spaces where you could be an A-list creator, but be accessible to someone who's starting out, because we all felt like the scrappy kid who wasn't invited to the table. So there was more of an open exchange of ideas or resources. And I still see that. The medium and the means change. I mean, we used to meet at conventions or through fans or friends and other colleagues, but now also the internet allows us to have direct contact with one another as well. And I've really found that what's great about horror is that horror creators are still first and foremost horror fans. And that fandom, much like I was talking about with the cult idea, the community that centers around a movie, people like to share that experience. So when you're out and talking to another creator and you reveal, oh, I'm a fan of Poltergeist, Rosemary's Baby, or The Exorcist, me too, and that's what made me want to do XYZ. Next thing you know, you have a dialogue because you have a shared love of these movies that probably some point in your life someone told you you were weird for liking. So there's a bond there. And I think that that's what's really great about the horror sphere is we all in some way relate to that. So I think we're more amenable to sharing information, contacts, or just a tip like, hey, I saw that you were going to be doing this, like you should try this for a sound design, bringing it full circle to that, or work with this camera guy if you're looking to do this kind of particular trick because they're really good at this. Sometimes it's like technical things feed into our nerdity because we know the point of reference that we're going to, and then like, I'm looking for this, well, such and such told me to talk to this person about this, and this. And that's what's really lovely, because I do work in a lot of genres, and I've been very lucky to work in a variety of mediums. And all of them have been quite nice, but there is not quite the open exchange of information as there is in horror, which I always have really, really loved.
Well, I tease you every time I have you on because I'm a huge Hallmark fan. Christmas movies. You've written a couple of great Christmas movies. I think that's going to air with this interview. One of your neighbors and friends, Mike Zara, excuse me, that did fantastic kind of a horror Christmas spoof. Do you like to mix genres ever in any of your things? What's your thoughts on mixing the genres?
Oh, I absolutely love mixing genres. In fact, I have a Christmas horror film of my own that is sort of sitting on someone's desk waiting for a thumbs up. But yeah, I love Mike Zara's Letters to Satan Claus. I think that movie's great. In fact, last year for Midnight Mass, we did a thing on our Patreon where we did an advent calendar where every day we revealed the title of a different holiday horror movie that we recommended our subscribers watch. And we were very happy to be able to introduce Letters to Satan Claus to some of the folks who didn't know about it. And it became one of the more popular titles on our Patreon because people were like, oh my God, I need to check this out. And Mike is, in fact, a friend and a neighbor. As you pointed out, we get together for coffee pretty frequently. And I was really happy for exactly the thing I was just talking about, the close community, to be able to tell him, hey, we just introduced your movie to these people. And so don't be surprised if you see an uptick in views this year from this particular subsection, because they're really excited about it. And that's the joy of both horror and holiday films, is they're constantly being rediscovered. I've written, I think, 5 holiday movies at this point, and every Christmas I hear about all of them from somebody, because someone revisits them, somebody airs them again on TV, someone queues it up on streaming. because people like to integrate these things into their traditions. And next thing you know, if you make a holiday movie that someone likes, they're going to be watching it for the rest of time. And there's no more affirming or nice thing as a creator to see. And I love crossing the genres, but I also love that because I see a lot of commonality between them. I think I told you when I was on last time that I, in a certain way, view the Christmas movies as very much like cult films, because they come with a certain set of expectations and they come with a certain devoted audience. And while I think those audiences are very different, the audiences for horror movies and Christmas movies, I think their devotion and passion for the material is equally like a flame, if that makes sense.
No, it does, and I agree totally. I mean, my little gay heart just about exploded when I saw Kelly Clarkson have balsam tree advertisement on her, because I see my best genres. So we kind of look for those things. We got to find people that we do, and then we go back to these traditions. So I agree 100% on those. Talk about the difference in writing, what the background is in your head for writing a horror movie and writing a Christmas movie. What are the main plot points you have to kind of go towards each direction? And how do you keep those separate in your mind and not combine them?
So it's funny because I do get asked this question a lot. And there are two things that I always say. And the first thing will sound totally counter to what I'm about to follow up. But the first thing is that every movie, when you approach it, is totally different. No matter how much you've written, it feels like the first project whenever you start page one of anything, because they all come with their own set of rules. They all come with their own set of challenges. But that being said, I think that approaching a horror movie or approaching a holiday movie, oddly enough, I don't approach them all that differently when I begin the process, because no matter what kind of story you're writing, you need to strive for authenticity. You have to create your characters and you have to establish who they are. And that's the work you do. Who are these people? What are their goals? What are they like? And so that's what I spend the time doing. And then you introduce them into a scenario. So it's more about creating the characters and less about kind of the world, because it's all about the circumstances those characters exist within. I think that the beginnings of any script, I approach the same in that way, because then it's all about their journey. Are they on the way to grandma's house for the holidays, or does their car break down and do they have to use the phone at a castle on the way? Those two things, it's like, if they get there, they may have a lovely Christmas movie. If they don't, they may have a really terrible time. And it's how they as characters would respond to the scenario. So I create my characters or craft my characters from a similar place every time, but it's the circumstances that change. And that's what's exciting, because I think that that's also, for my particular mean of creation, it's sort of true to life. How we react personality wise is going to be different based on whether the situation favors us or puts us in danger.
Right. And talk about the inspiration. Are these all fully cut from full cloth, or is it just from experiences for the people you meet in the community? Where do a lot of your ideas come from?
For the horror or the holiday films, or any?
Either, any of the above.
A lot of the horror films come from more of a personal place. I think about things that I am interested in seeing, or maybe seeing in a different way. I also, speaking to the societal impact of horror, I'm always fascinated by being able to use horror as a mechanism for commentary. I think one of the other reasons that we like horror in a more macro way is because you can use that dark lens of the fantastic to address things that the mainstream may not really want to tackle head on. And so suddenly the monster can become representative of doubts and fears or cultural prejudices, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I'm approaching a horror movie, that's usually where I begin. What do I want to see? What do I want to say? And how do I want that to manifest in a monster or in a fear? As far as the holiday films, those come from all sorts of different places. Sometimes because that space is very different, a producer will come to me and say, oh, we want a movie about Christmas cookies. Do you have any ideas? And then I'll figure something out. Or sometimes they are in the process of developing an idea and realize, oh, we have the idea, but we don't have someone to write it. Other times I've been sitting around here thinking it would be really great if I could do a Christmas movie about blank. And then I pick up the phone and call someone and see if they'll pay for it. So,
Right.
but it's always that thing where it begins with sometimes just something really simple. Stephen King always says that most of his ideas always start with the thought, wouldn't it be funny if? And he never really intentionally sets out to write horror. It just turns that way because he has a twisted brain. And I think that I relate to what he says because many, many movies that I've written do begin with, oh, wouldn't it be funny if? And then next thing I know, it's like down one road or the other, exactly like I said, on the way to grandma's or on the way to the spooky castle. So,
Right. I love that. And you've worked with such great actors. I mean, we've had Adam Huss and his husband Adam Bucci on the show. You got to work with them. You work with Freddie Prinze, or you wrote for Freddie Prinze Jr. So a lot of great people. But I think the reason we first met back in the day was because of Ben Bauer, and you have Danny Plotnick. You work with these great actors. Talk about getting that community of just your people coming together and kind of creating something together again. Is that kind of exciting when you all get back together?
it is. What's great, so Ben specifically, yes, I do recall Ben was the reason we first connected. Ben is a very dear friend of mine and a close collaborator. And a lot of times when we do projects within our June Gloom sphere, June Gloom Productions, which I co-founded with Brandon Kirby that you mentioned in the intro, we specifically are looking to create things with a queer social commentary or queer horror bend. And Ben and I had known each other for a really long time, and we had always really wanted to collaborate on things. And when June Gloom was getting going, he brought some ideas, and I pitched some ideas to him. And it just started to manifest that I kept making things that he kept starring in. And then as I kept writing, I just started thinking of him as sort of that characters that I was creating. And he's a really, really wonderful person to collaborate with, and I love working with him. And the thing is when we're away and doing other projects, invariably the phone rings like, when are we going to do the next thing? And that's become true of so many other people who are part of our film family. You mentioned Danny Plotner. Danny has been in many things with us. He's a dear friend of mine. Tiffany Shepis is someone we work with a lot. Francisco Chessin. These are all people who really came to the work and got the work, but were excited by the idea of taking queer stories, taking horror stories, putting them together and saying something new. And we got to create this like troupe of creators and performers that feel like a family. And so we all work in different aspects of the industry, and we do all work separately as well. But when we have the thing that is the next thing for us, it feels like coming home. And those are some of my favorite projects to do. And I think that's something that if you are a film fan and you watch the works of like Christopher Guest or Wes Anderson or any of these filmmakers who seemingly work with the same groups of people over and over again, that's why, because there's this interesting exchange of creation that happens when you have a film or creative family that makes the art feel more personal. And so folks like Ben and Danny and Tiffany and Francisco and even the people behind the scenes who work so tirelessly to help make these movies happen, like Andrew Sepperly and our sound guy Matt Kendrick. And I just really love working with all of them. Sammy Kolko, she was one of our regular producers for so long. It's really it's special. It is special. Like we may be making horrifying things for your eyes, but we love doing it, and it means so much for us to get to do it together.
I love that. And talk about working behind this. I mean, you've directed a lot of your own shorts and a lot of your own movies that you've written, but you wrote for 2 years and now directed this past year the Chainsaw Awards. How was that for an experience? That would be kind of exciting.
It was exciting. So the Fangoria Chainsaw Awards are a long time institution. I think they started doing them in 1992, where Fangoria, of course, the very well-known publication in the world of genre and horror, they created this award ceremony that's for the fans, by the fans, where fans of genre get to vote on the movies of the past year. And the kind of buzz around it is that it's the horror Oscars. That's what people like to say. It's true. In 2022, I got to write the show, and I worked with filmmaker Amalia, who directed, and she was really wonderful to work with. And it was a real great experience because she really was very encouraging of the fact that I had a whole script to write. Most award shows are written by a team of people, and Fangoria approached me specifically like, can you do this? And I was like, okay, well, that's a challenge, but I'm willing to take it on. And it was really fun, and I got to be a presenter that year as well. And so when they cycled around for 2023 and asked me to write it again, but also direct, it was sort of like, okay, what's the challenge? What didn't I say last year that I want to say? What are the ways that I can do this in my way? And it was truly a fun, stressful, wild experience that allowed me to also really, really get in touch with the fandom in a different way, because you're engaging with the movies that, people are rabidly wild about because they're voting on them. And then I got to work with so many friends and colleagues and legends who came to present awards, accept awards, and celebrate. It was really, really great. And then by the time it aired on Shudder in May, I was ready to sleep for a couple months.
There you go. From now on, May and October will be your hibernation months for you.
Yes.
I like that. Or November. And then let's talk about some upcoming projects. I remember we talked off air last time. You've had projects that kind of get into this limbo heck where it takes years for that to happen. And we've had the writer's strike now, which some projects are part of, some aren't. We have the actor's strike still going on. Hopefully, they're talking this week, I think, while we're filming this. But talk about the challenges of past productions and what you kind of hope to see here in the future. What do you have coming up?
Well, one of the things that's coming up, and kind of cycling back to the collaboration with Ben and Danny and Brandon Kirby and Andrew and everyone that I mentioned, we did last year do a feature film that I wrote and directed called There's a Zombie Outside, which is sort of a meta horror movie about a guy who is very, very committed to cult cinema and how he starts having problems discerning fact from fiction. And we shot that last year in August of 2022 into October. And it is now finally almost done in post. So that should be coming out at the top of 2024. Very excited about that. And then as far as projects that are coming, I've definitely got some things on desks that we're just waiting for both strikes to be done so we can do right by everybody. As well as within our small little indie world, we're talking about what our next feature is now that Zombie's done. We've been kind of on the horn back and forth, like, okay, when we're able to move, what are we going to do, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm feeling optimistic. I want to make sure that my colleagues and friends in SAG-AFTRA get what they want, and I'm in solidarity of them. But I know that they're ready to get back to work, and we're ready to get back to work. And when they do, we've got plenty of movies to make. So
I love it. And as we wrap things down here, I mean, you and Brendan are very good about traveling and stuff. We talked about this being a busy season. Where do you kind of like to go unwind once these seasons kind of end for you? Do you guys have any particular spots, scary or not scary, you like to attend when you're out traveling about?
yeah, you're referring to Brendan Haley, my partner, not my business partner, but my boyfriend. Yes, he and I go to a lot of places up the coast. Here in California, there are a lot of really lovely coastal towns that have sort of a spooky Victorian atmosphere that we like to just kind of go and hang out and get away for a couple days. We have a few different spots we like to visit. And sometimes we're big fans of just a staycation, turning off the phone, watching a movie, and staying home, because a lot of my work, as well as his more recently these days as well, does require us to be kind of traveling or going places or doing this convention or going to host that screening or being on set, that sometimes being home is actually the gift.
Gotcha. Well, Michael Varrati, it's been my pleasure getting to have you finally back on the show again. Thanks so much for taking the time, my friend.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here for the end of October to celebrate Halloween with you.
There you go. Halloweeny weekend is upon us. Let everyone know where they can find your fantastic podcast, your website, and where they can find you on social media.
Well, for the podcast, you can find it wherever podcasts are found. It's Midnight Mass. We also are on Twitter at Midnight Mass Pod. I am on Twitter and Instagram at Michael Varrati, and those are two good places to keep up with me, because I will definitely be letting you know when new episodes are coming out, when movies are coming out, when television's coming out, when you can read this, listen to that, etc., etc.
Fantastic. Michael Varrati, thank you so much. I can't wait to see you guys hopefully out here in Ohio making a movie sometime soon, or we'll have a coffee when I hit LA sometime this Christmas season here. But thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Stay on the line for me. Guys, we're going to have a special 5 questions with Michael next Tuesday, so be sure to look for that. We have a whole group of people that we're doing this weekend to wrap up spooky season next Tuesday. So look for that. We appreciate you tuning in, and have a great weekend with spooky season coming to an end. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to The Left of Str8 Show. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast distributor, and please give us a 5-star rating so more listeners can find us. You can follow us on social media, and be sure to check out our website, www.leftofstraightradio.com, for contests and other news and information. See you next week.